So, as we start this, I am drinking a seltzer water instead of a coffee. The reason that happened is this. Actually, it all goes back to the last time that we recorded. Because, when we record, it's usually early in the morning before I had to work and everything, and I had a coffee that day, which I normally do. It's an instant coffee, not the greatest coffee in the world, but it got the job done.
I mean, if you can, oh my God, what job though? Anyway, sorry.
Oh, keeping me up, keeping me up. But what I was discovering over time and what like sealed the fate for my future coffee usage was the last time we recorded because I drank it. And then like after it was like during the recording, it was fine. But then afterwards, it's like when the caffeine rush really kind of kicked in. So maybe I put in a little bit too much coffee or something like that. So I ended up going to work and it was like I felt like rushed. I couldn't, sometimes if I have like too much caffeine or something like that, like talking sometimes can become an issue because it's like it was rushing things out and I was getting irritated too, which I think, when you're working with a bunch of dogs, you don't want to do that.
Right, especially because they vibe so much. Like a lot of their evolution has relied on reading human behavior and emotion. That's why they make such excellent therapy animals, by the way, because they evolved to that. The history of the dog. You can Google that yourself and let their AI review maybe give you some misguided information, and then you can find a link with the accurate information of history of why dogs got domesticated or whatever. But yeah, like it makes sense that you'd want to be chill around the dogs. It is of no secret here, we peppered in this fact frequently, that caffeine intake does mess with anxiety and does mess with our mood, and it can make us more irritable. So it kind of makes sense that you're saying like, oh yeah, like it did that and that wasn't so great.
Yeah, it wasn't great for them, wasn't great for me either. I mean, it would be like, I probably would not have even noticed if I had like a traditional like customer service type of job. I mean, it's like, I'm not a huge fan of interacting with other humans anyway, so I would have been naturally annoyed. And it would have been like that show Spaced when the female character Daisy had an episode where she did multiple jobs and got fired from multiple jobs because each time a customer asked her some help, she goes, fuck you, and walks off.
Right, it's like it's hard to tell, is the feeling irritable because of the caffeine intake, or is it because people are people, and most of them unfortunately seem to walk around completely unchecked for their behavior. No, not most, just enough of them to sully it. And it's like, it's also a little bit like with your history of customer service, I understand, because we had that weird overcorrection. Like we talk about the pendulum a lot. It's probably even going to come up in today's episode because we talk about this whole, our culture seems to be a series of overcorrections on either side, right? It seems to really affect our mental health. And so like the pendulum being swung over on caffeine intake and everything, like the customer being right part anyway of it is that the customer's always right in matters of taste, right? And you can stop me if I nerded about this recently, because I know this came up somewhat recently when it came to, like, I laugh about it coming full circle because of, was it Coca-Cola, like maybe spinning up to the Super Bowl that was using AI like to make a commercial? I forget who, so
Yeah.
please feel free to fact check this. I just know it happened. I feel like it was around the holidays or the Super Bowl or something. But what I recall of the story without Googling it to distract myself is that they used like AI to create the commercial. And the customer feedback was that, we don't like this. There's something about it that feels stiff. There's something about it that feels cold. And Coca-Cola or whoever it was basically went, well, I mean, that's fine that you think that, but you're wrong. And I'm like, how hilarious is it? Because all of that to say, like, you got the brunt of the customer is always right overcorrection pendulum, right? Like, they forgot about it's only in matters of taste. It is not in matters of store policy. That is the end of where the customer is always right when it comes to this relationship. But, right, I think you'd agree, and I've worked in retail too, there is kind of a toxic overcorrect of customers being right about everything suddenly.
Yeah, I would say, like, to be clear, like, I know I'm quite the cynic when it comes to customer service, and it's not something I really want to go back to unless there's really no choice for employment or anything like that. But having said that, to be clear, like 90 to 95% of my interactions with people, when it comes to, selling them stuff, was fine. Computer repair probably didn't help and had a lot more people that were just vicious for the sake of being vicious, especially when I worked at Apple, because they were not really a true repair shop or anything like that. Their job, since they made the devices, if people brought them in for repair, was to only really cover things that were covered under the manufacturer warranty,
Yeah.
and all that
Which
stuff.
is
But
frustrating as a customer, right? Because if you just have an expectation that a place is going to fix your problem, like those guys being grumpy, and I'm human. I will admit I'm not perfect, guys. I talk about stuff because I'm aware of it. And when I know I am worked up, because I can just be honest with myself when I'm on the phone with a customer service person, I name it from the go. And it really helps like take the teeth out of the temptation of making it their fault. They are just sitting behind a desk. They have had literally nothing to do with my experience until now, and they probably have a decision tree and can only do so much and can only do certain things if I say certain words in a certain order on a given Tuesday. Like it's not their fault. Their hands are completely tied. Just so you know, behind that desk. But yeah, like, and so anywho, just that whole full circle thing of then Coca-Cola being like, actually, you're wrong in matters of taste now too. Like, I'm like, okay, this is an interesting time that we're now in. Are they trying to pull the pendulum back on the other direction of the customer's opinion doesn't matter anymore? We're just going to do whatever saves us money. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, 'cause
well,
it's just an interesting thing anyway. But yeah, so it's got to be a lot better dealing with dogs, but probably a clearer indication that maybe it was the caffeine and not the patrons of the store, even though the patrons of the store is an easy thing to confuse with being the reason, and understandably so.
exactly, exactly. Like, especially the older I get, I've come to understand the importance of understanding your body and everything. And I think, the past couple weeks, cutting back on not having coffee during the workday to start the day off has definitely made things a little more on the tiring side, but mood wise, a lot more manageable, and again, to be clear, it's not like I was going in like screaming at the dogs or anything like that. But, to your point, they were picking up on the fact that I was a little more short tempered than usual just because of the caffeine. And it's another thing too, I want to make 100% clear. It's not like I'm swearing off caffeine, period. That is not,
Right.
believe me, I don't know if I would be able to survive that much. And I think moderate levels of caffeine, thanks to usage in like a drink or something like that, is fine in like moderation. But how I was,
Yeah, well, I mean,
yeah,
it is something that you've been having, so you also need to be real that like a detox can happen, so don't be surprised. Um, I remember the Bishop Chris. In high school, there was a time where, money got tight a lot because I was raised in a low income household. We felt it more when we moved off the farm, though. Like living as a farm kid kind of has this magical way of hiding feeling poor. And then when you get rid of the farm, it's like, oh no, we're poor. Got it. Um, like, okay, reality has now been checked when half of our food isn't just in our yard,
yeah.
like, hey, eggs and meat, it was just there. Well, now we got to buy that. And so, like, Karen tried to cut soda, and the Bishop Chris, very big into Dr. Pepper, and like, discovered very quickly we had to move to Dr. Thunder or whatever the Walmart brand was because he started getting headaches, like, immediately. Like, it, and Karen, at least being somewhat in the medical field in the past, went, oh, okay, well, we're having caffeine withdrawal. Of course, you're having a Dr. Pepper every day. Every day. As a kid, this goes back into the one thing I really wish if I could just like ensure, like, this isn't about shaming anybody for not knowing, but my gosh, if I could share any bit of information, it is we've got to stop giving children caffeine. We've got to stop it. Like, in all the secret little ways that it comes in too, right? Like, people are like, you don't let the baby Reverend have chocolate. And I'm like, no, because there's caffeine and like 4 other stimulants in chocolate. Like, and I didn't know that until I gave it to him and he acted like a fucking maniac. Like, it was very obvious that it was not a good choice. But at the same time, like, I get why parents do it because like half of the aisles are marketed with chocolate shakes and chocolate things for toddlers. And I'm like, well, yeah, like even the Cliff Bars for kids have chocolate chips and chocolate swirl and chocolate dipped. And I'm like, okay, so this is part of it. But yeah, so just be aware, like, that you might, depending on how did you say today was day one?
No, it was 2 weeks ago. So we're at
Nice.
the 2 week
That's
point.
right.
Yeah.
You're saying a 2 week point because when we recorded, because we did not record last week. Because, yes, we are working on some of the formatting stuff in the background of this, which is super exciting for content. So that should get more regular for you guys, by the way, especially like once this one airs, because I would say this is probably the beginning of my commitment as hello and welcome, like generally our uptick in listeners. We've noticed you. Hi. And
Yes.
so we're going to try to maintain some consistency for you guys now going forward. So when you tell your friends about us, it's not like, well, it's Wednesday. Where's the TLDL, Reverend? So yes, thank you for hopping along and helping inspire us, getting our act together a little bit, and even having a meeting this week, right?
I
Letting you
know.
guys
So
peek behind the
professional.
curtain a little bit. Yeah.
So professional. Unlike the very first Friends Talking nerdy meeting we had back in 2017, which was the opposite of professional, but at least there were alcoholic beverages at that time.
Yes. And then the second meeting, which we thought we would be more professional, but just round up sitting around watching TV, drinking alcoholic beverages, and probably smoking weed. Like, we could probably just admit to that. It was Portland. Like, I don't think anybody cares. I know it says, like, in all the leases not to smoke there, but I think everybody knows everybody's smoking in their houses in Portland.
Yeah. I mean, because
Especially in downtown, like, where we met. Like,
yeah, like I think most people understood how to use that in their homes without having it permeate, like the walls or something like that.
and then there were the people that didn't care. Like, there's that too.
Oh, that too. But those people, anyway. But look at that. Everybody's here. Thank you. Welcome, friends. This is
Yeah.
Tim the Nerd, and joining me with her Moxie Day shirt, we have the Reverend Tracy. Kind of goes back, talking about the early days, your dinner theater days. Murder mystery days.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. Yes, because I do love Moxie soda. By the way, if you were ever in a Rocket Fizz, I learned that they carry Moxie soda. I wish we had gotten a second one. Sorry, my toddler is back in here. I need to stop calling him that. He's a little boy now, right?
Little
He
man,
is
yeah.
demanding his red video time as promised because, oh yes, clasp your pearls loudly, folks. I do let him watch some YouTube Kids, but it is like only during situations like this, right? It's like I need to focus. So it's like, you know what? There's nothing wrong with it. I love it. Like, it's super funny, like how judgy people really still do get in public about it. I'm just like, no, you don't understand. If I don't give him something to do, I can't grocery shop, and I need to feed my family more than I need to teach discipline today on this. Like, he will get to a point where he won't be sitting in the cart watching a tablet. He will be walking, picking stuff. But right now, he's a little monkey, and he's more likely just to get run over because half of you guys are self-involved on your phones walking down the aisles and don't see him. So yes, the safety thing is just to plunk him down, allow him the little bit of brain candy around his day, and so I can get some shit done. But it is kind of funny though, because for the most part, like, I go back to one of the best things about the pandemic, I would have to say, for parents, is the ability to just pick up an order. Like, that now living where we live, that's an option again, is amazing. 'Cause I didn't really utilize it much when we were living together in Maine. I didn't need to, right? Like, I could take the bus, just pick it up. But like with this guy, it's super nice that I could, like, all right, well, he's playing and doing stuff and self-entertaining. I've got the laptop up and doing my grocery shopping, and then we'll just go pick it up. Like, it's fine. I could do that today and ride my bike over there if I wanted to, Like, I live in an area where I've got that privilege again, which is kind of nice. So, anywho, that being said, sorry for the disruption if that came through. Yeah, I'm trying to set the stuff on this headphones because supposedly it should be able to block stuff out like that, but apparently it's not.
Well, again, I get entertained, but speaking of parental opinions, that brought me back to when I worked at Best Buy, and when the fourth Die Hard movie came out, I was in the entertainment section helping a customer out, and she had picked up there was a PG-13 version of the movie, and then there was a director's cut of the movie, and she was looking at it, and I was, she had the PG-13 cut, and I was like, oh, you probably don't want to get that because the language and everything like that. One of the, when it comes to Die Hard, one of the most iconic lines is "Yippee ki motherfucker."
Hmm.
But I told the woman about the language and that she should probably go for the director's cut. And then, with a straight face, looked at me with a dirty look, like, I don't want my kids to hear that kind of language. Yeah, she's cool with lots of death, lots of explosions and stuff like that. Her kids are cool to see that, but how dare they hear an F word? One
I
F
know,
word, my dude.
but you have to keep in mind this goes back to culture and time, right? What were parents told were the things you had to focus on. And the potty mouth, for whatever reason, shook way up to the top for a while. Because to your point, like I want to say there were cuts in other movies, and God, it's like a famous like kind of beaver shot scene where she like crosses her legs very
Basic
slowly.
instinct, yeah.
Thank you. And it's like, I want to say, because remember, I was raised in the area that had that section of Blockbuster that was like, hey,
Behind the curtain.
Christians. No, the opposite of behind the curtain, kind of. Like, hey, Christians, these are the specially edited movies for you. And it was like they focused so much on language, but like scenes like that were still in some of them, supposedly. We never watched those versions. Like, in my house, it kind of seemed like if it was on that wall, we probably didn't need to watch it. It was kind of how a lot of households did too, right? And it kind of makes sense. Like that really is kind of your moral thing. Being on the wall to have been edited for your viewing kind of does indicate like, but maybe I just don't need to watch that movie. I get why people made that decision. I get why people watched the edited ones. They didn't feel out of pop culture. But yeah, it's kind of funny, like the things that got cut and didn't, and that language was so important for so long.
Yeah, it's weird. Some people,
I mean, it
it's like,
still kind of is in a way, but yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, because like with my kids, like I didn't mind if around me and me alone, they
Mhm.
threw out an occasional curse word because one, always laugh if a kid swears, but two,
You can't help it. I know you're not
yeah,
supposed to, but it is kind of funny. Like,
yeah,
I know we've talked about it.
but to me, the other part was it was more along the lines of teaching them the importance of understanding there is time when it's okay to say those kind of words and a time when it's not.
Yeah, and I think that's very German mentality. That's what I was raised into.
Yeah,
But anyway, yeah, like this is like speaking of raising, right? It does kind of at least go to the tune, like to what we're talking about this month. Because yeah, my German side comes from my father's side, and that was pretty much where I feel like we had gotten that mentality that we were taught. Like, there's times you curse, there's times you don't. There's people it's okay to do it in front of, and there's people that it's okay, but not if you're being mean. Like you still weren't allowed to be mean, but if you stubbed your toe and said shit, but then turned around, like that's fine, but you can't like turn around and call your brother a piece of shit. Like that's mean. You shouldn't allow that part anyway, right? So that I guess I'm saying I relate because it feels very much a little bit akin to what I was raised under,
yeah,
which goes back to making me a bit weird because that is kind of more common to the generation more above. Because I'm in that weird realm of millennial, right? Like, yeah, where I don't really quite feel like I align completely with my younger half of my millennials. I'm a little bit more with what was it, Gen X?
Gen X, yeah.
Yeah, Gen X. Because I always get for some reason Gen X and Gen Z. I want to flip them, but Gen X, I more align a little bit more with Gen X. And I guess what's cool is I'm in that geriatric millennial loop that I love that that term only lived for like a hot second before a bunch of people got overtly upset about it. I'm like, what is wrong with you guys? Geriatric isn't an insult. Like, ageist much? Like, oh my god, I just learned so many of my like demographic is ageist, like with one little news article. I remember like kind of really making a brief stink. But yeah, like we're kind of that gap between the baby boomers too, apparently, with like helping with some of the technology because we have the earliest memory, and I believe that's you too, like Gen Z and the millennial, geriatric millennials, like because we do remember You know what I mean? Like we had early internet, like we learned it as it was rolling out. And that puts us in a very cool position to like be able to teach it in a way that's better and help guide. So it's like it even goes further to that topic we come back to right now that it was like what's been lost in the multi-generational home being gone is like, yeah, you guys lost your tech support. That's one of them.
Yeah, and then they keep the Fox News. But anyway, well, we are continuing Fatherhood Month here on Friends Talking Nerdy. And what we wanted to talk about today is kind of something we've been touching on for not only during Fatherhood and Motherhood Month, but, I think we've kind of talked about this cycle off and on, and that's breaking the cycle because we've talked about when it comes to stuff like parenthood and everything, how easy it is to find yourself kind of going through and repeating kind of the same mistakes that your parents made that you swore you would never make yourself, not understanding that life can kind of continue to steer you towards making those same mistakes as well. And also too, if you are raised to believe, even if you don't want to, that a certain way of doing things is how you do things, it's gonna be harder to break from that loop and or break that cycle to go ahead and try and do something different because you don't know how to play the game otherwise, really.
Right, exactly. And that I know we definitely talked about it in Motherhood Month. And it's okay because we also kind of assume people can pick this up and put it down. And it doesn't really hurt to hear it again. Right. Um, because it goes into we all could use to do it. We're all constantly doing it. Like, my gosh, I hope we are, because discovering that reparentification is a thing that we can do gives us a lot of control over shit that we didn't have control over. Right. And then it also helps stop it. And it helps stop it earlier. It goes back to like talking about alexithymia, which is awesome because I still wanted to do that as a TLDL, and it will likely be the companion to this episode since it makes sense with this. And we're talking about some of the stuff that I wanted to bring in of what you can do. But there is like a quote out there that basically says, if you get on the wrong train, get off at the nearest station. The longer it takes you to get off, the more expensive the return trip will be. So it's okay if you're learning later, but don't, well, I mean, I guess I'm fine. Like, no, really look at it, investigate it, especially if you already have kids or are going to have kids. Because guess what? If you already have kids and okay, yeah. So you've already done some of this in front of them. Okay. But the earlier you get off the train, the earlier you're showing them that they can get off the train too. So, like, you're still teaching something by not having always been perfect. And if that can resonate ever, I'm hoping it does, especially as we wrap up Father's Day month, because this is where we might actually take a break from talking about this concept, right? Of breaking cycles, because it does make sense. We're talking about our mothers, our fathers, not even just like us as parents, but the effect that they've had on us. And it is important to recognize that in a healthier space. Right? You can do more than, well, I just don't talk to them anymore. And that's valid. Like, you can have very good reasons to not talk, but you owe yourself a little bit more, right? Like, you can fix some of the stuff they didn't do for you. Like, sometimes, yes, it does need guidance and some help. And by all means, if it's that level, get that help. But I'm hoping what we can share by the end of the day between this episode and the TLDL is, if you find that these things apply to you, alexithymia is also not gender specific. Women can have it too. That there are things you can do kind of to get yourself on a corrective path. Even if you don't have kids and never plan on having kids, this is still good stuff to do for yourself, right? Like, all the studies show working these things out and coming on the other side is a healthy space. Even if that healthy space is you're not talking to each other anymore. Like, it's still better, right? Like, I go back to, that's all I'd ever asked for with my bio dad, being a kid that's estranged from their parents, right? Was like, hey, like, can we hit a start over button and just be cool? Or do we talk about it? And like, getting the whole neither answer was what was damaging for me. Right. So,
Yeah.
and so for me, the healthy thing is like, okay, well, we just don't talk. I can be healthy about it. They're like, I'm not mad about it. I just don't want to talk to you anymore because every time I try, I feel like there's no effort on the other side, right? Like, and that's just how it is, right?
Right.
So, but the more that we can like kind of look at these things and address it is good for you, whether or not you have kids or not. It's good for your mental space.
Indeed, and I think that's one benefit of what we do here at Friends Talking Nerdy by talking about mental health stuff. We are not licensed mental health professionals in any way, shape, or form. So like the type of talk that we're going to have is just normal, everyday people talking about this stuff, which I think should be encouraged. Those fires should be stoked in people to where they do talk about that. And if we can help all of our double-digit listeners now, to be able
Yeah.
to be able to talk more openly about this stuff, then we're doing something good.
Yes, and just to be fair, we have been double digit for a little while. It's getting closer to like being halfway to triple digits, which is cool. But
Yes.
right, and then me, I am a nerd that studied psychology for a while that still likes to read Psychology Today and SciPost and stuff like that. So I'll introduce stuff like when it comes to breaking cycles, it does start with awareness, right? And some of that is being aware of things like adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. And I know we brought up this term in the Mother's Day episode, but it is one of the most influential findings in modern psychology. With this is called the ACEs study, and researchers found that childhood adversity can have long-term impacts. So this goes back to you as a child. If your father, if your mother wasn't perfect, didn't have it together, and who can blame them? Because what tools did they have when we were children? They didn't even have the smartphone in their pocket to Google or use AI as a pretend therapist. Like I mean, whether or not you approve of them, they are still tools, right? And they didn't have them, and that's just factual. But yes, the childhood adversity can have long-term impacts on your mental health, your physical health, your substance use risk, and your stress response systems in general, right? So going with the fact that probably most of us had parents that weren't perfect and didn't have access to knowledge to raise us as well as they could have. And that's not from a demonizing space. They've never heard the term emotional intelligence. They've never heard the term emotional regulation. So how could they have any snowball's chance in hell of teaching us how important that would be when they didn't know the term, let alone have the data to say that these things are important, right? So this is where it's like, yes, if you realize you're stunted in these ways, it is super important to realize it's time to get off the train. You can get off that train. You can get on a train in another direction. Depending on where you get off at, it might be a little bit more difficult to find a bus route. But hopefully you don't get off too far into the sticks and are still around the main lines.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah.
yeah, you don't want to go to a place where it's like, you ain't from around here, are you, boy?
But many fathers trying to break cycles aren't just rejecting parenting styles, though. They may be actively trying to prevent experiences that they know affected them personally. And this is where we can go back to the pendulum swing,
That's right.
right? Yes. And that's why it is important to talk about it, because if you would like to try your best to avoid pendulum swinging, we have to have the conversations that involve the shadow work and the shadow integration, talking about what we do and why we do it.
That's right. Now, a lot of fathers today are trying to raise emotionally healthier children while still healing from emotionally unhealthy childhoods themselves. I think one of the biggest generational shifts happening right now is that many fathers are actively questioning the way they were raised instead of automatically repeating it. For a long time, parenting was treated almost like inheritance. This is how my parents did it, so this is how I will do it. But modern fathers are stopping and asking, was that actually healthy? Did that help me emotionally? What do I wish I had received as a child? And what do I absolutely not want to repeat? And honestly, that can become emotionally complicated very fast, because once you start examining your childhood, you often realize some things normalized in your family weren't actually normal emotionally. And I think back to when you talk about having a good laugh talking about interactions with your brother, and then having everybody else look at you like, oh my God.
Like, oh my God, you guys, you realize you're beating each other, right? Like, that's not good. Like, yeah. Oh my God, the look on their faces is still like priceless to me. But exactly. Exactly. Like, and the problem is that is where it can be complicated. And that's why I think it's important to constantly remind our parents were just people. Most people are not narcissists, like clinically level narcissists. We all have narcissisms, and if we're not looking at them, we're probably indulging in at least one or two of them, right? To be self-serving. That's part of that Jungian psychology, that shadow work stuff that we were talking about. But yeah, like it's hard, especially when you do love the person, when you feel like they dropped the ball. And that's why I think when you are doing reparenting, especially if you do have a healthy relationship, or actually, even if you do have a very unhealthy relationship with your parents, I just think it's super important to remember how privileged we are today. Like living today. Like I go back to, I have not had a lot of questions about raising my child I was not able to find some reasonable sounding answer to, and double check the resource where it came from in the doctor within like minutes. And our parents factually did not have that. Goes back to what we talked about in one of the mother's episodes, is at best our parents had whatever books were at the library if they weren't checked out. And you know what I mean? Like if they even had them. Because it goes back to parenting, like was kind of always considered this natural thing you just do. And it's cool because I'm reading a book right now, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to do this content-wise, because I think some of the books I read might be interesting for the topics we cover. It's called Hunt, Gather, Parent, and it's talking about how America is actually really weird because we actually aren't getting a lot of our parenting advice passed down within the homes anymore because we're moving out so soon. And many of us are moving further and further away than we used to. Your mother, the grandmother to your kid, is not like right up the road anymore. They're 5 states over and a 6-hour flight or whatever. You know what I mean? So we've lost some of that, and there's a bittersweetness to that part, right? Because yes, you're the toxic stuff you don't have to repeat, right? But now we're all having to book learn this instead of having any of that knowledge kind of play out in our home. So kind of bittersweet in that respect. But as you do go through it for yourself, I think for the sake of your healing, you might want to remember your parents weren't the devils for not having access for information and trying the best they could with the information they were eagerly provided, likely by their pediatricians.
Yeah, which we've also, given the disclaimer for many times as well. That does not forgive them for making truly bad mistakes in any way, shape, or form.
Yep, this goes back to, we've discussed the concept of impact versus intent. They may have intended for you to be the type of human that didn't go to jail, but the impact of them spanking you for every little mistake and accident you did doesn't matter if their intention was, you know what I mean? Like we've talked about that concept before, but that doesn't also negate that their intention was not to abuse you. And with the facts that they had in their head at the time, it's reasonable to believe they weren't intending to abuse you. And like looking for those green flags in people is kind of important. I found it important for me. There are other people that talk about that it was important for them because it helps you realize it wasn't about treating you poorly. It helps take away how personal it is. So no, I'm not trying to excuse bad behavior. I'm just wanting to give something that I feel definitely helped me, because I've made it no secret that I've had a little bit of a rough background with both of my parents.
Oh, yeah, mine wasn't rosy either. But, I
Yeah.
think about, one thing that parents can fathers especially, are thinking about these days is when it comes to stuff like discipline and everything, because
Hmm.
you want to be able to have your kids respect you when it comes to the point to where you have to tell them, you're not doing that. I'm going to take this away from you because you threw it at my head, which is, it doesn't matter the age. Things get thrown at your head a lot when you're a parent. But it is important as a parent to really think about how you are perceived, because like I think in last week's episode with Professor Aubrey, I brought up this example of how it is possible when you're working with dogs as well, to think about that mindset, because if There's a difference between a dog that respects you, that's going to listen to you when you say, don't do that particular behavior that you're doing. Obviously, you're not going to talk to them like that. You're just going to be like, stop. Obviously, they don't know words, Tim. But, there's a difference between a dog that will respect you, respect the discipline that you're offering them, and compared to a dog that fears you. A dog that fears you may listen, but a dog that fears you may also react against you.
Yes, because that's something that even I find myself trying to fight, that urge of like, it's discipline. But that's what's been interesting and soothing about the book that I am reading right now is I'm learning like really the discipline comes like from other sources. Like you don't enforce the discipline to create discipline. You do other things and that creates discipline. You build the teamwork mentality and it gets them more on board with seeing something needing to be done and then doing it. Versus the chore chart actually might really undercut a lot of that. So, like I said, super interesting book. Highly recommend. But teaching me a lot about like my own parenting styles and stuff like that, like some of the struggles with some other kids. So, all kind of like leads to that same kind of theme, like that we're trying to change how things are done, but we're also trying to remember what things worked, right? And it's hard to swallow that pill that being disciplinarian doesn't work because it goes back to that was that easy solution, that satiated that simplicity bias of, oh, it's just as easy as discipline your kids, train them, do this. And it's just like, I'm learning that's not really the way that it works. Granted, I've long suspected, and it goes into some of the ways that I felt was natural to treat my stepkids, them being older when I was introduced. But it is funny how much you can backslide into stuff that you really didn't feel worked, all because of that overstimulated brain. It makes it very easy to slip back to stuff. It goes back to, if you understand anything about how our brain works when it's feeling overload, that cognitive overload, it's going to go back to old habits and old patterns that we feel paid out. Whether or not that actually was true didn't matter. We talked about this, I want to say, around New Year's, because I think those are the things we tend to bring up around New Year's, or like habit formation and stuff like that, and why breaking old habits is hard. Well, now you're trying to break an intergenerational habit. And it doesn't help that we have some good parenting styles being communicated out there. But just as we talked about in the history of psychology, there is a little bit of social speak that's kind of giving a bad rap to certain parenting styles. For example, like gentle parenting. I know we're going to go into that, but like it makes it difficult to break cycles from a lot of different angles when it comes to parenting, I think. And I think that really does go back to, not only are we trying to learn everything from scratch, we're learning everything from scratch, but then also being told that like half of it is damaging. Yeah. So there's like the double thing. And then at the same time trying to reparent ourselves, which is another thing we're doing. So all at the same time, which makes it incredibly stressful. And since we don't live in that bubble, you can just go ahead and add the stack of everything else that plays on our brains too. So
yes, all that cognitive load.
All of the cognitive load, all of the stuff that you're doom scrolling and making the micro decisions to scroll past it or click on it or share it with a friend, like all of that is playing on the father's brain at the same time.
Indeed, indeed. Now, psychologists often talk about intergenerational transmission. That's the idea that emotional patterns, coping styles, attachment behaviors, and even trauma responses can quietly pass from one generation to the next. We've just been touching upon that. And it's not because parents are necessarily evil. It's usually because people parent from what they know. Again, if you're, taught to, build a coffee table in a particular way, if that particular way is wrong, but you don't know it, you're going to continue to build that coffee table in the way that you were taught, unless you either take the time to think, why is this leaning to the left? Or if, somebody, is able to help you say, oh, no, you got to put the leg on the left side, you got to even it out, pal.
Or even like doing it in front of you, like not kicking children out of the problem-solving situations. And we've talked about how we accidentally do that with arguments. Well intended. I get it. We don't want to have fights in front of our kids. But you also need to realize you should have reasonable fights in front of your kids so that they can see what those look like, because that is how kids learn. It's all mirror neurons. You can tell all you want, but unfortunately, their brains are wired to mimic and mirror. And so if you're not showing them, they are going to have to take the same stumbling blocks to figure out how to have conversations and live in the adult world that you probably had to do, right? Like I'm assuming most of our listeners are in our age demographic and therefore can probably relate to a lot of our own things that we're saying we relate to with this. So, yeah, like we weren't taught how to have healthy arguments. Double whammy. Not only did we not get to see it, we didn't get taught how to name it, to tame it, and talk about our emotions and maybe breathe through an emotion so that you can have a calm conversation, because that works better than having an emotionally charged one. We didn't have that either. And I think now kids are more getting the latter. So they're getting told, but still not shown. And that's just the unfortunate thing that I think is missing, that we're going to have to accept, is that kids need to be shown. Like everything indicates that that is their learning pattern. That's why they try to grab the spoon from you to stir the bowl. It's literally how they learn everything, from physical skills to social skills like these.
Yes, which is something you can do, again, as I've talked about before, it's something you can do no matter the kid's age. Even if your kids are, considered legally adults, you can still break some of these cycles to kind of be there for them in their experiences if they're experiencing it for the first time, because it's tough for a father to try to break an unhealthy cycle, because they may be attempting something nobody modeled for them growing up. And, think about how hard that is. It's been hard for me kind of, readjusting how I think about things, like I talked about, last week, how, you have plenty of people that will say, I knew my father loved me, but he never said I loved you. And
Right.
that's something you kind of want to break. I mean, it's like, it's easy to look at a 3-year-old and say, oh, I love you. But if they're 33, some parents have an issue of not being able to do something as simple as say, I love you. And just trying to force yourself to break that, it can be tough because it was not modeled for you. And if it's not modeled for you, it may not feel right. It may not seem like the right thing to do, but it can be important to break that cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's what people don't respect enough about cognitively, like how the brain works and how like changes, especially as you get older, like do actually get harder. And this even goes back to look at language. This is exactly why grandma maybe still said some racial slurs, because for like 80 years of her life, they weren't slurs. Right. And those are incredibly hard things to change. Even being somebody myself that considers myself gender fluid, I'm not very good at the pronoun speak, because for like 30 years of my life, it was he was he, she was she. It was an insult. Look at it's Pat. The whole thing with it's Pat, is that the title implied the joke, because it's almost a play on dark humor. To it somebody was dark humor back then. So like we all admitted itting somebody was wrong, and that is why it's Pat used to work but wouldn't work today.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
absolutely. Like it did work back then, does not now. And it's incredibly hard, even though I would say I'm not bigoted and I'm not like anti-queer, especially since I feel like I'm in the queer community. But I do really have a hard time with pronoun switches. Like, and it is just something I'm honest about. It doesn't mean I don't work on it though, because that's the other half of that equation. You can admit something is as a gap for you, but that's not an excuse to not work on it. And something that we also talked about that I think plays into this with fathers changing and having a harder time as they're older. Like, so not only are we compounding like the fact that you were raised away and then continued that way into adulthood. So we're beyond raising. You've now like secured this as a thing that you do into adulthood, which then gets harder to change. Right. And we talked about in our other episode that we have this identity for fathers. The value feels very contingent on certain things. And one of those things is being that emotional rock. So if you have been trained your whole life that saying I love you shakes that emotional rock, you're going to have a hard time. It's going to be the equivalent of saying, that stove is red hot, touch it. Touch it. Yeah, just put your hand on it. Yeah. No, I promise you will be fine. It's good for you actually to put your hand on that red, hot looking burner. Right? Because, it goes into identity threat. We're the line that we go to a physical thing. So, yes, it is actually insanely hard for that dad to suddenly hug and I love you. It really is. And if we can have a respect for that, I really hope we can cut our dads some slack. Especially if you're in our age demographic. And, we've got some of our fathers who are in their final stages of life now. And I know my father ain't getting any younger, right? And so as we kind of process some of this stuff, I think it is important to know that just because they didn't say it does not mean they didn't love you. And just because they did have access to the knowledge, someone has told them it's okay to put your hand on the burner. If they can't get over it and do it, it's just kind of understandable if you can relate it to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it does not mean they didn't love you. They probably very much did.
Yeah, hopefully. No, I'm kidding.
Hopefully, God, my God. Most people, I go with most people, right?
Yeah.
Most dads love their kids.
Now we're going to be talking about here a subject you've brought up before, gentle parenting. For many men, gentle parenting feels emotionally unnatural at first because they were raised in environments where emotional softness was treated as weakness. I think people misunderstand gentle parenting sometimes. They imagine no rules, no consequences, kids running the house like tiny dictators. But actual gentle parenting is more about emotional regulation than permissiveness. It's staying emotionally controlled during conflict. It's teaching instead of intimidating. It's helping kids regulate emotions instead of punishing emotions. And for fathers especially, that can feel incredibly unfamiliar because many men grew up with parenting styles centered around fear, yelling, emotional distance, shame, harsh discipline, and the phrase, because I said so. So now you have dads trying not to repeat that while their own nervous system was trained inside that exact environment.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it goes back to this thing, the gentle parenting isn't from nowhere. And this is where we get into, unfortunately, when something gets caught on and it becomes part of social media speak, you can get the wrong idea on how something works. And this is even something that existed pre-social media. I recall people getting really hurt, if not dying, due to not really understanding how the Atkins diet works. Because they got told it's as easy as this, cut all carbs, which is not good for our bodies either. And weren't eating no, you're still supposed to have carbs on Atkins. It's not no carbs. But people heard oh, just cut carbs and you lose weight and you get healthy and it's great. And that simplicity bias takes over because it sounds just so easy and we love those easy solutions. Right. And so when people's oh yeah, no rules, no consequences, the kids get to make their own rules. I see where you would oversimplify it that way. Tim's laughing at my face because he can tell that I know the difference between the real thing and the not real thing. And it is funny because you have these conversations with people because in the parenting world, people do kind of give their opinions slightly in passing conversation. And you do hear a lot of bad things being said about gentle parenting when really it's no more complicated than understanding social learning theory. And that's a psychologist named Albert Bandura. He proposed that. And it's really what I was kind of explaining earlier. It's children don't simply listen to how to behave or how to learn a behavior. They model behaviors, which means a parent demonstrating calm conflict resolution is way better of a teaching moment than a parent explaining calm conflict resolution. It is better for them. And that's what a lot of gentle parenting is. It is as simple as, if I've ever mentioned it on the show, that I realize if I want the baby Reverend to breathe through his hardest emotions, maybe I need to take that step and introduce doing that when he's not having a meltdown. Hey, and guess what he's really good at doing now? For the most part, and sometimes he says no. Sometimes I want to cry, and that's valid. Sometimes I just want to cry, right? Like, why do we try to take this away from our kids? It's teaching that emotional numbing, the alexithymia type stuff that we just talked about, not being that great for them and being something that they may have to very well reparent later. So, like, yes, a lot of gentle parenting is the trying to break the cycles. It is
Yeah.
trying to, like, that you can hug your kid when they're having a tantrum, and that does way more than shutting them down, trying to be the disciplinarian. And I know you're overwhelmed and it feels like that's what you're supposed to do, is control the situation. But unfortunately, we've been taught wrong, it seems. And there are still plenty of ancient cultures that follow what we used to do before Western civilization kind of got their fingers in the cookie jar of parenting. Right? So yeah, it's a nice, good thing to teach kids. Kids often learn more from what we model than what we preach. Right? There's a reason. Monkey see, monkey do.
Which I think can be hard for some people that were not taught this growing up themselves.
Yes.
When they
Yes.
are the parent, it could be much easier to just, snap if the kid, breaks a glass or something like that. It could just be easier for the parent to say, "How dare you, go clean that up," instead of, maybe you shouldn't have been playing with your toys next to the glass, which bumped into it and caused it to go on the ground. Maybe, and having that conversation from there. Now, to be clear, like, if it's a situation to where, like, your kid intentionally takes your car keys and then drives your car through your front door, maybe you can be a little mad at that point. We give you permission, but the point is I guess, it's to kind of, as the parent, teach yourself to take that deep breath and not react. I think a lot of times too, it's easy. When you react to something, you're just going based on what you already know, and it's. And sometimes you got to fight that. Sometimes you have to take that deep breath yourself in order to give that calm response to your kid.
And that is something I've seen played out in my own home. The Mr. Reverend comes from a background, and then he also was in the military. So realizing as his children has gotten older, of taking that breath and calming down. And he'll do it when he gets excited or like starts to feel that and it's funny because I've watched my bonus son do that too. And it's not always like anger. We've watched him work and resolve a lot of anger, and I do think a lot of it comes from watching his father learn how to resolve that anger in himself.
Imagine
Because
that.
it Yeah, because we talked about, like, anger was one of the few emotions men were allowed in our generation still, like, especially us being the older millennial, like, we still have that hangover of we more align sometimes emotionally where we are with Gen X, Gen Z. Yeah, like I said, I just always flip them. I can't help myself. But with our prior generation, basically. And so, like, he's learning that more and more about himself, especially with, like, some of the therapy and some of the talks that we have. Like, you don't get to live with a psychology nerd and not talk about emotional intelligence and things like that. And that, hey, we don't need to, like, put our worst emotions on people. And that's even what we say to the baby Reverend, is like, no, it's okay. I understand that you're upset, dude, but it is important to calm down, right? Like, and basically we're learning that subtle difference, and that's what gentle parenting is trying to do, between shaming an emotion and encouraging not letting it hang on. Does that make sense? Like, you don't need to shame it and shove it down. You can acknowledge, yeah, it is frustrating that you got told, no, we're not going to the splash pad today because it's raining. I understand what it's like to be frustrated at being told no. Like, we can tap into this and understand it better instead of shut up, I told you no, which is so like how we were raised. Like, no meant no, and you don't question that. You don't get to be upset about it. You shut up and you deal with the no. But we're learning that's not helping them deal with it. This is turning us into the people that turn into frantic road rage monsters because somebody drove too close in front of them. Right? Like, this is what we're accidentally doing. This is how it is a cultural impact, and this is why talking about parenting, whether or not you actively are parenting people, or maybe just have an interest in dabbling in reparenting yourself, is kind of important to talk about. Because these are the things. This is the domino effect, right? Like, we're raising the people that are in society around us. So this does matter, whether or not you have kids directly. Because also it gives some understanding to the humans around you, right? That same compassion of not being really pissed off at your parents, you can have and hold that for other people who maybe haven't been exposed to the knowledge that you get to be exposed to because you chose to listen to something today, right? Like, a lot of people aren't getting exposed to this side of it. And I think that's why it's important to talk about. But you can
Indeed.
always learn these skills later, which is what Tim is about to probably wander us into next.
Yeah, here we go wandering, folks. Now, one thing attachment research consistently shows is that children tend to regulate emotions better when caregivers remain emotionally regulated themselves. We've already touched
Mhm.
upon that. But emotional regulation is a learned skill. A lot of fathers are trying to learn it in adulthood while simultaneously teaching it to their children, which is kind of emotionally wild if you think about it. Some dads are literally learning emotional vocabulary, patience, conflict regulation, affection, vulnerability at the same time their child is learning it, which I'm sure can confuse the child. But I think it can also be an educational moment as well, because you may confuse them initially, but you can follow up with them with the explanation of, oh, hey, I was annoyed. I had too much coffee this morning and my reaction was not what you should have received. And I apologize for that, because there's no such thing as a perfect human. There's just not. And, we are all going to make mistakes here. Like, the stuff we talk about today as a parent, we're not, it's like you with a much younger child, me with much older children, we are still going to make mistakes. We're still going to have times to where we're going to be like, because I said so,
Right.
and
But the thing is get off the train. When you realize you're doing the thing, get off the train. Show your kids that you can get off the train. We've got to kick what we brought up in both the mothers and the fathers episode of that we are supposed to know that there was some kind of like download that we got in our brain to do everything perfectly and be perfect human beings. If we want our kids to say, hey, I made this mistake, I am sorry, can you help me fix it? If we want that from them, you absolutely have to model that for them. And that whole idea of like humans unconsciously influencing each other's emotional states, that is very much like something that we evolved around. It's called emotional contagion. That's actually why, like, when somebody is in a shit mood, it is very likely to change the mood of the room, right? And because of what we understand about negativity bias, that poop mood is going to be stronger than the good mood. Right? So those negative things are going to be what your kid pay more attention to. So if you're going to do that negative thing, you might want to make sure you're ending it with a transition to something positive, like naming your own emotions, like saying that you're sorry. Now, I want to put an asterisk next to that saying you're sorry part, because I do feel like a lot of us, if not in our generation, our parents were like this. The I love you was just as hard as saying I'm sorry. Like, saying you're sorry was the you're going to burn your hand if you do that message to dads for a long time. So sometimes that sorry doesn't sound like I'm sorry. Sometimes that sorry sounds like you didn't deserve to be treated that way. Sometimes that I'm sorry was I was really frustrated and I took that out on you, right? Like, we do need to kind of have a little bit of that compassion, I feel, when we can go, okay, I know that this person was raised in a household where maybe that was taught was that that's going to burn your hand thing to say or do. And understanding that it is not that easy to flip something like that and suddenly convince yourself it's okay to touch the stove. Have that compassion with people and like see where they are. Look for their intention, because you're allowed to do that. You can understand that, man, hearing that I'm sorry would have a way better impact on me, but you can try to dissect it the other way and look for those, like I say, the green flags. Look for like where the person probably does love you. And it's like, okay, that's the sorry. That
Yeah.
they are saying it. They just they can't do that part of it. And sometimes I do think part of having good human relationships is accepting and understanding reasonable or understandable limitations of people.
Yes, and the baby Reverend just jumped off the bed. Wow.
Okay, hey, don't you make it sound like that. There's a ledge. He has a step, and he is allowed to parachute from the step when a pillow is on the floor, you monkey. Anyway.
Now to kind of piggyback up. Oh, go ahead.
But yeah, but that emotional contagion stuff is all part of that natural stuff too, right? That is part of like kids reading the rooms. This is part of like, we glorify empaths. These people that say that they are super, super sensitive. But unfortunately, that gets born a lot of times because children naturally are particularly sensitive to caregiver emotional states. It is not completely unlike dogs that we were talking about, the sensitivity. Children know, and they are sensitive to it, which helps explain why a calm parent can help calm a child even before words enter the picture. And this was like something that I had to learn as I was trying to curb my own overwhelm, my own overstimulation, and like getting mad and not wanting to be a yeller, but like feeling that urge to yell, was understanding that like I need to bring it down because he's just going to match my energy. So once you're feeling that almost needs to be your trigger internally that, whoa, I need to calm the fuck down, since he just walked back to put away the shake that he just got out of the fridge himself that he can't have right now. But you know what I mean? And one thing that I had learned was like when your child is having that, like just hug them. Hug each other, calm down together, show how breathing works. Like there are steps you can take to bring yourself down. So it has that double impact because you're also modeling how to come down. If you want your tantruming child to come down from a high emotion, you better be willing to teach yourself that skill, because I think that's what kids see all the time, is that parents permit themselves to blow up and be mad and have their own tantrum. And it goes back to that really damaging thing that I feel like we both heard. Do as I say, not as I do. But the more we understand about that verbiage, which was taught to our parents to tell us, right? They were told that. That's why we all heard that shit. That generation learned it from somewhere, and they didn't have Facebook. So somehow that got so permeated into our parental culture for our parents that you and I both know that sentence, right?
Oh yeah.
Do as I say,
yeah.
not as I do. So, but now that we're understanding more about cognitively how kids work, we understand how backwards that is. That's the literal opposite of how kids learn how to do.
Yeah.
They're going to do what you do. They're just going to try to hide it because it's conflicting information. Yeah.
Like hopefully not the monkey shake there.
He still has it, but it's okay. I am fairly confident he can't open it. So you go ahead and lead the way while I put this on mute, listening to you, but correcting the behavior in the background.
In an appropriate way, yes. Now, to piggyback off of what you said, many fathers are emotionally developing years after adulthood supposedly already started. I think one of the strangest things about modern masculinity is how many men reach adulthood without ever being taught emotional intelligence directly. Not because they're incapable of it, it's because nobody taught it. A lot of boys learn to suppress their emotions, avoid vulnerability, stay productive, don't cry, don't talk too much about feelings, and then suddenly adulthood arrives and people expect emotional communication, healthy relationships, emotional regulation, parenting skills, self-awareness without ever teaching the foundations. It can be tough because it is a skill. It's not a trait.
Right.
It's not like you being an introvert or an extrovert or something like that. This is something that has to be taught to you over time by people that kind of know how to do it themselves. And if it's not your parents, who are you going to learn it from?
Right. It's not completely unlike driving a car, right? Like if your parents never taught you how to drive, never let you be behind the wheel. And even worse, in this situation, it's almost like you were never allowed to be in the car, or you were rear facing for your whole life, or had like one of those vans where you faced away and never even got to be exposed to the driving. Like, and then, all right, well, 18, keys, go take the test, go drive, go drive. Like, it's a skill. And I think that's why it's like it's almost looped in with some of the mental health talk, right? Like the invisible scars almost. These are invisible skills, but they're just as important as learning how to walk, as learning how to write, as learning how to do basic math. Like just because it's nothing that produces directly on a paper or directly at an ending skill physical set that you can see doesn't mean that it's not important to teach, right? And it goes back to we didn't have a lot of this information before, so of course nobody has been teaching it, right? It seems like it was possibly passively taught when you lived around a lot of people. Because, gee, golly whiz, what do you got to do when you live around a lot of people? You probably got to talk and communicate. And like, you can't just have a fight, cut them off, and say, screw you, pound sand, I'm never going to talk to you again. That wasn't an option. You had to work through things. So whether it was, and they weren't directly teaching how to conflict resolute, they saw it because you had those generations that lived in a home together, and the stasis of the house required you to get along. So you had to find ways to, right? Now there were healthy and unhealthy ways to do that. Right? There were the stuffing down that still happened, but that doesn't mean that it's better to not do it, right? There were still skills that were kind of taught in that situation. Whether they were all good is still up to question. But with knowing what we know now, it could probably be taught better, right? It goes back to you don't have to do multi-generational home for this either. It's as simple as having those slight disagreements with your partner in front of your kid, so
Yes.
that they can understand what that looks like. But this also goes back to we also had the other side that wasn't shown either. Affection was often behind closed doors. So we didn't even know proper affection in that sense because it was never shown. And that privacy was never really allowed in prior generations, right? Like, I always think the funniest thing when people talk about co-sleep is like, well, when are you ever intimate with your partner if you're sharing your bedroom? I was like, you realize your great grandparents lived in a 2-bedroom like cottage and had like 10 kids. I don't think intimacy was a problem. Like it's a right, like, but we think about it like we don't see any of it. And I'm not saying like have sex with one of your kids, please, my God, don't take that away. I'm just saying like we over sterilized it. Like, or we don't even like hardly kiss or hold hands, or at least my parents didn't. Granted, a lot of my raising, they were divorced, but even like the step parent relationships, I didn't see a lot of affection. And that's something that's not completely uncommon in my generation.
Yeah, and I think of TV shows like Little House on the Prairie from back in the day, to where it was a 2-story log cabin that they built in the middle of Minnesota or something like that. But the kids were upstairs, that they had to go upstairs by climbing a ladder. The parents had their bedroom downstairs. The parents were going at it every now and then, and the kids must have heard everything, and they must have had their fingers in their ears maybe, but they
Right.
heard it. They heard it.
Right. So basically, we've over sterilized parents having emotions and emotional needs, and those emotions, like all of it, the positive and the negative. And so it's like no wonder kids kind of sometimes are starting to treat us like we don't have them.
Yeah. Now, do you think female-bodied people are socially trained emotionally earlier than men?
Yes. We even talked about, like, I'm just going to bluntly, we talked about this even in the other father episode we did at the top of the month too, of like, yes, even fathers to their daughters are more tender and caring about what are you feeling? Are you hurt? Are you scared? Like, you're more likely to drill into, I feel like from my experience and what I've been exposed to, girls were more likely to get drilled into for that. Now, I am the weird anomaly that I wasn't. I was a farm kid, and some of us female-bodied farm kids got a little bit of more of the, you're not bleeding, like, so a little bit more akin to what I feel dudes would relate to. And I guess that's why I feel very dudeish in a lot of respects, because in a way, emotionally, I was handled in a more dudeish manner. It was, I got big girls don't cry. Right? Because I feel like my generation kind of teeters between those two. You're either a big girls don't cry or all of your emotions got inquiried. So speaking of emotions being inquiried, somebody is sad about something on his screen, but I will figure that out later as long as he can move on from it. But right, like, but I do feel, generally speaking, even today when I see it on the playground, because I've talked about still with boys, that it does kind of seem like, hey, you're not bleeding, so you must be okay. Nothing's broken. Your arm isn't backwards. You must be fine. Now, do I hear it more than I used to? Yes. With boys, like talking about the, are you scared? Like, I know we do that with the baby Reverend. You know, we try to assess, are we injured, or is it a pride injury? And it's like, are you hurt or are you scared? You know what I mean? So going that route with him even. So I know we're trying to break some of these cycles, but I still think we're a little behind on boy emotions, which is sad because that alexithymia, which I looked up how to say that like 6 times because I was ready to do an episode on it for TLDL, alexithymia, is no joke, and it's not your fault. Like, that is legit something that just didn't get taught. And so this is our way of trying to break the cycle in our home so that this boy knows that more than anger is acceptable. He's allowed to feel more than anger and frustrated because we've had too many generations where that's all that's been allowed for our boys. So
It's teaching emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence isn't just being sensitive. It includes identifying emotions, regulating reactions, understanding emotional patterns, communicating feelings clearly, and empathizing with others. And many fathers experience a delayed emotional education once they become parents because children force emotional reflection. A child's emotions often triggered unresolved emotions in the parent, and suddenly fathers begin asking, why does yelling affect me this strongly?
mhm.
Why am I uncomfortable with vulnerability? Why do I struggle saying affectionate things? And why does conflict make me shut down? Parenthood sometimes becomes the first mirror men have ever really looked into emotionally, which again, I can say from my experience, it's definitely been that way for me. Because
Right.
before my kids were ever a thing, yeah, I mean, we probably wouldn't be talking. Let's put it that way. Just me emotionally, I was a mess. I mean, and and you've seen me as a mess over the years in a lot of ways. Let's put it that way. But it was much worse at one point, and having kids really kind of forced me in a lot of way to address that because of how much of a responsibility parenthood is. It's like, yeah,
Right.
you're going to mess up as a parent, and you may mess up to the point to where maybe at a later date your kids need some time away to not speak to you for a few years. You got to live with that. you know
Yep, and that's okay. And then ideally some of the message out there is, if you are a kid who stepped away, look for those signs that they've grown, because there really is a lot more studies out there that support that if the person is capable of healing with you, that is going to be better for you long term. And I know that is a very hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. But I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not impossible for you to like grow and heal and move on without them. Don't hear that. I'm just saying it seems like it can put some certain like odds in your favor of more successful healing or even faster healing if that person can be involved in it, right? I mean, that's why one of the rules in AA is apologize where you can reasonably understand it's not going to do more damage, right? Like, there's a reason they say that you should try to apologize. And it's not for you as the AA person. It actually is for the people in your life that you've maybe caused some damage to with what is ultimately trying to self-medicate with something that our culture tells us, like, blow off some steam, drink a beer after work, right? So, like, there's a reason that they have that suggestion, and it's not cold-hearted. It's definitely not to hurt or cause more harm to the other people, and it's not for the AA person. It is more for the other people being able to heal and hear that it wasn't about them. It was about the other person using something to try to self-medicate, probably, most likely. That's like 9 times out of 10, I feel like, with alcoholism, is that's what we're doing. It's like the way that culture told us to self-medicate for stress after work, and then it just gets out of control. So, but anyway, digressing a little bit. But yeah, like, so one of the important things is like, yeah, that normative male alexithymia, and it's never too late to address it. And like I said, I want to go into it. I've already written out the script so I can record it today and be on the ball with this new schedule we've just agreed to. Of going into that like in a gender neutral way, because the important thing is if you know you've got it, it's just important to work on it. And one of the other things to add in here is it's incredibly important to have what's called a growth mindset as you dabble into learning emotional EQ skills, so emotional intelligence skills, right? And psychologist Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset fits so beautifully to this. And it's like basically emotional intelligence is not fixed. It is not like once you hit a certain age, oh, you're done cooking that one. No, it can be learned, it can be improved upon, it can be practiced. And you can even do stuff like there's an old podcast, doesn't run anymore, but it was one that I listened to a lot when I was trying to groom this in myself to reparent, was like emotional EQ or something. I will find a link to it. And maybe we can either put it in this one or we can put it in the link when I do the too long didn't listen, because I did plan on bringing it up then. I will confirm the name of that podcast. But you can find any number of them that's basically just talking about it. Because it goes back to when you listen to things, you are normalizing it for yourself. So if you can maybe change up your music for a little bit and change it over to emotional intelligence grooming content, you might find it easier for finding ability to emotionally regulate. Right?
And there's a great movie that I would recommend too that kind of touches upon all of this. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I think I've told you about that one before, correct?
Yes, you have. I think we've seen it before. Sorry, there was a spill that I was being drawn my attention to. I got it. It's just water. But yes, I want to say you've seen that one. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Wasn't that with Tom Hanks?
Yes, the Mr. Rogers movie. Peripherally, though, it's like Mr. Rogers was a character in the movie played by Tom Hanks, and it opens and closes just as if it were an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But it
Yes.
really tells the story of the main character in the film is a reporter, and the reporter you find out has had a bad relationship with his dad. Up
Mhm.
to the point to where, at his sister's wedding, he punches his dad out.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's right. That's right. I almost forgot about that part of it.
yeah, but by having his father suddenly pop up in his life again, he is with his father coming back into his life. Was able to not only by the end of the film repair the relationship that he had with his father, he was able to identify the fact that he was kind of making some of the same mistakes his father made at a similar age as well, and because it was also established that the main character was a new father himself. And he
Mhm.
ended up growing and learning. So that's one I would definitely recommend for people to check out. Obviously, it is a tale of fiction, but it is based on a real life story that occurred.
Right. And it's like there is something for that. And I feel like people have heard the term before called self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is that phenomena where a strongly held belief or expectation about a future outcome causes you or others to unconsciously act in a way that makes that prediction a reality, right? It's like you're trying so hard to not do something. And if you're also looking for a good reparentification, I go F is for family. And then what is it? Hold on. Is it? I do want to confirm the name of this because it's so relevant. I want to say it was like called Angry Dads, but Bill Burr stars in it. And it is so much like a little bit. Bill Burr talks about in his comedy too that he was angry. Old Dads. There we go. Sorry. I wanted to find the name of this because it's so good. Old Dads. Because he does kind of talk about it in this movie as well, but he has alluded to it enough in his comedy that it seems that he is trying to address in the comedy field that some of us were raised by angry dads. And that if we want to stop that, you have to address that shit. You have to address your anger. You have to. And so his comedy brings it up. Old Dads, really good movie where he also kind of talks about and catches himself repeating some of these cycles, even though he doesn't want to. F is for family. I talk about Frank Murphy. He hits that. It's like new Frank, new me, not going to yell anymore. And like, he tries, but he doesn't have the tools, right? That was like the 70s or whatever that was set in. So of course he didn't have the tools to actually change, but he knew he wanted to. And that should mean something, right? To even know that you want to change at least shows a sign, a green flag, dare I bring up, that, there's hope that they're not a piece of crap person. And those are the exact humans you should want in your life anyway. are the ones that can identify that they don't have their shit together and want to have those conversations with you, because it's way more healing than the other ones. Just saying.
Indeed, indeed. Now, many fathers today are trying to verbally give their children things they never received themselves. I think this topic hits a nerve for a lot of men because there are countless fathers who grew up in homes where love may have existed, but emotional expression didn't. Their dad provided, worked hard, stayed present physically, but emotionally, affection may have been almost non existent. There was no I love yous, no I'm proud of yous, no hugs, no emotional conversations, no vulnerability. And what's interesting is many men don't fully realize the emotional impact of that absence until they become fathers themselves. Because
Mhm.
suddenly they're holding a child and instinctively want to give emotional reassurance they themselves rarely heard. Now, I think back to, couple of months back, I heard some news about a friend of mine's kid that was sad. Let's just put it that way. I don't need to go any further, but ended up talking to my oldest about it a little bit. I just, briefly mentioned it in a text message. And what made me so happy was that my oldest responded back, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that." And then he told me, "Remember, it is okay to cry."
Aw,
And,
that's
and
good to hear.
and I could not believe that, he said that. I had such a big smile on my face afterwards, even when it came to such talking about such sad news, I guess, but because to me it's like the things that I have been working on to kind of break the cycles that I experienced to by hopefully making sure that he can break some of those cycles himself the older he gets. He's currently not like a father himself or anything like that, so he's a slightly different situation, but he's also 25, right? And going and learning a lot of things about what life was like for me just by experiencing some of the same things, himself for everyday life. I think he's, getting to that point to where he understood why I did some of the things I did, not necessarily agreeing with it, of course, but he's been able to walk some in my shoes. And
Exactly. That's where it's
yeah,
like you can reverse engineer that intent versus impact. And what I mean by that is if you feel like your parents had a severely negative impact, you can try to look for signs of what their intent was. That is not saying the emotional impact it had on you doesn't matter. It does. But I do think it's important to try to understand people's intentions. Otherwise, you are going to be in that hyper vigilant mode, constantly looking for assholes because your experience is that people are just assholes. Right? But if you can unpack that in a way that's like, oh, well, actually, you know what? Turns out my dad didn't spank me because he wanted me to have bad outcomes. It does turn out he was told your kid's going to end up in prison if you don't teach them that this is how the world works. And boy, golly, can I kind of understand that, especially when you don't have the pocket computer to vet that with anybody else. Right? And it goes back to that doesn't negate the impact it had on you. But you have to admit where that probably feels better as a belief, to know somebody was trying their best and not, no, they just wanted to hit me because they just didn't really want kids, right? Because that does exist, but that is rare. Thankfully, as it should be, it's rare.
yeah. Now, something too, when it comes to fathers, it's like they were taught, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself, that the way to show love is through actions, right? Whether it be like a birthday or a Christmas situation, or, you're showing love by buying the best possible gifts that you possibly can, showing love by being there at like recitals or school events, or if whatever type of event that they're a part
And
of,
that's
which is
newer.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's newer though, right? Because a lot of our dads, and this goes back to that contingent value that we talked about at the Head Father's Day episode, is, well, yes, that's how you show love because your value is money for the household. So of course that's where your energy is going. So that is the product you have to show your love with, right? If all of your time is going to that, your product is buying things.
But the
Or
kid,
experiences, yeah.
yeah, but your kid at the end of the day is not necessarily going to put two and two together, because if the kid is like 5 years old, for instance, they don't have this idea, this socially ingrained idea of, fathers are meant to provide and all that stuff, and the fact that they're providing you with a new Xbox means they love you.
Nope, they need to provide you time, and that's all and it goes back to, you got to talk about it to understand and learn and see differences, because it still very much is the message, especially with divorced families, which I know we're going to get into this month, because of course we will, because those divorced fathers' mental health matter too. And I know it's given me a lot of compassion when it comes to processing shit with my own dad. But that's part of that message we give dads, is that was the important thing. And now we're trying to unpack some of that and undo it. But unfortunately, instead of going, the money is less important, the time is more important, I feel like dads got stacked with, well, you still need to make all the money too. But now you also need to find time to do these things and be there for the recitals and be there for the things. And don't forget, you still need to work and reparent your own fucking emotions, because that's on you too, while you're doing all this other stuff and earning the money, right? But even if you're a 2-income household, that expectation is still a lot on dads. It's not gone from others. It's on us too. But it is still kind of where the invisible job list still statistically weighs against female bodied. That expectancy to be the primary earner still weighs more on dads. Best of my knowledge, best of numbers I can find, that is our current yin and yang, where there's an overcorrection on each side of that role.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And it's like, older generations of men were often socialized into provider-based masculinity. Love was demonstrated through sacrifice, labor, reliability, and financial provision.
It was more the mom's job to help translate. Like, when you think about it, it was mom's job to help translate that the money was the display of love from the dad. And I think that's why that model worked for so long, because we have to remember, the one earner and them having this dynamic did used to work. It worked for longer than it didn't, at least. Like, it seems so, right? And I think that is part of where that was important, because the mother had more energy for that role when the mother wasn't also working. When the mother is also working, but still managing the emotions of everybody, which is on that invisible job list. And that's one of those jobs that seems to be what mothers, female-bodied parents, tend to take on, even when they're working, is this emotional manager thing. And I think that's where it comes from, is that it's the thing you used to always be. You just now have other roles around it. Same as males used to traditionally be the ones who could make income, right? Because for a long time, women weren't even allowed to make income. That is so still new when we think about our greater history. And I think right. And so now you just had it stacked. You still are supposed to make the bulk of the income, but now you're also supposed to do the time and do the quality time and stuff like that with your kids. And I think the same thing is happening with women, with some of that, the emotional management. You were traditionally the emotional manager of the house, but now you're also going to work. But you still have the emotional management role. It's almost like you get hired for a promotion, but they still want you to do that old job on top of your roles with the promotion. Right? So it's like we just never got rid of that social expectation, right? There's no rule that says we have to do it this way. It just seems to be how we are still operating. And probably it's just because we're not letting go of the old roles.
Indeed, because we got to remember that while intentions matter, children still emotionally experience what they emotionally experience. A child may intellectually understand, "My dad loved me," while emotionally still feeling, "I rarely felt emotionally connected to him." Those are not always the same thing. And you can understand that someone may have loved you as well, but if you don't have that emotional connection with them, the older you get, the less likely you're going to be inclined to want to hang out with that person,
Right. And that's where it's like, it goes back to dads being given the message that this is the way you do it. And children are actually getting the message that the time matters. So unfortunately, it does feel like in kid culture, in kid world, because that's something I've appreciated about this book of child world versus adult world, kid world versus adult world. But in kid world, so in their entertainment, in their social circle, their talk is, well, if he loved me, he'd spend time with me. And they're not necessarily getting as much of that emotional regulation speak from their mother anymore because the tribes have kind of shifted, right? Like we don't have our tribe in our home anymore. We search for it externally. And one of the drawbacks of that is you're more likely to get those kids like, yeah, parents suck because of that draw, that tastiness of in grouping and out grouping, and it makes it easy. Parents versus kids. It is easy to identify a parent versus a kid, an adult versus a kid, right? That's why it is so easy to groom that us versus them when it comes to our children and our parents. Because it goes back simplicity bias and in grouping and out grouping. The easier it is to identify an out group, the more likely you're going to want to do that. And that even goes into some of the racism stuff, right? When it's, oh, they're a different color. That's as easy as some of that was, is like just our brain wanting it to be easy. And it's just never going to be that easy, right? We used to do it with tattoos too. A tattooed person, oh, you better watch out. They're probably going to mug you. We
Yeah.
love easy identifiable outgrouping. And so when that's what they're getting is their peers helping fall into the outgrouping because they probably haven't even been taught to not do that with their parents. Because in kid world, even their entertainment enforces the idea that it's parents versus kids. Watch any bulk of kids movies and go tell me you don't see that theme, right? So
What's
like,
there?
yeah, and that attachment does matter, right? We talked a little bit about we're it's newer, but we are looking into attachment theory as it pertains to fathers. And we're trying to get that message out there that it matters. But the problem is we can tell fathers it matters all we want, but if the social expectation is still more on them making money is the important thing, they're going to have a hard time choosing not to make the money. It's almost like I'm realizing you're going to have a hard time choosing not to spank when everything is telling you the success of your children relies on you helping them understand how the world works. It's hard to fight the narrative when everything tells you as a father that the outcome of your child is factually related to your income. That is a factor. What stinks is yes, we do have the numbers out now to tell us that it's not untrue that money matters. So you're literally asking fathers to pick between two things that seem to both carry a lot of weight for good outcomes for kids. And that's the unfair thing that needs to be said out loud.
Yeah, and I think that kind of tackles, what I'm going to be speaking of here next, because sometimes parenting your child also means confronting the child version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
This might be one of the deepest parts of fatherhood psychologically. A lot of fathers aren't just raising kids, they're constantly encountering unresolved parts of themselves. You see your child scared, emotional, overwhelmed, vulnerable, and suddenly you remember what happened when you felt those things growing up. Sometimes fathers realize my child is receiving comfort I never received, and that can create healing, grief, anger, sadness, confusion, sometimes all at once. I think one of the reasons, and I'm not going to go into too much of specifics here, but I think one of the reasons I don't talk to my dad anymore is because of my kids. Like for the longest time as a young kid, I idolized my dad, not realizing that it was just my mom's failed attempt at parental alienation was making me like him more. But like the older I got and the more I got to know him, the more I understood why she was pissed off at him,
Right.
a
It is
lot.
kind of a double-edged sword. Like it like because sometimes it does go into our parents aren't perfect, right? But it also goes into, and this is going to be something that I want to address specifically on a later episode teaser. I think we're doing a disservice not reflecting on the mental health of our dads when alienation happens, right? Like, it does have an effect when you pull a child away from a father, when that child has been in that father's life every day too. And I think that's part of the equation we don't like to talk about because it's messy, because there's no good answer. How do you answer it when it's like, well, the kid's got to live somewhere? right? Like it's messy, and there needs to be better discussions around it, because what we're learning is the child's mental health is very much impacted by the parental mental health. And so if we're trashing the mental health of either one of the parents, that's actually putting the child at a statistical disadvantage for their mental health. So yeah, we do need to care about this stuff, and we need to do it better. Like, right? Like, so sometimes the dad is an asshole. Sometimes the mom is a bitch. That's just how that works sometimes. Sometimes you're super special and it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. You know what I mean? But being those things doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people, though. And sometimes that even comes into, well, what generation of couplehood were they raised under? Because we've talked about how that's gotten increasingly toxic, where it's like you have to wait or push buttons until somebody crosses a certain line, and then it's okay to split. And you might like be feeling that way all the while. Yeah, we're gonna have a kid. Because that line wasn't crossed yet, so I guess we're good. Like, meanwhile, you could have just had an honest conversation and maybe split up at an earlier thing, right? Like, but that comes into, that would require a lot of emotional honesty that we don't seem to groom in our dating world right now. Like, we still don't seem to groom it. We talk about it. We talk about everybody wanting to be honest with each other, but we still have this thing where we don't make it safer to break up cleanly without somebody needing to be the jerk. Because if you break up for no reason, but they're a good person, so what's wrong with you? Like, no, we need to stop viewing it that way too. People are allowed to decide a relationship just doesn't work. We're allowed to just want or not want things. And that's the thing that I wish our culture would go back to embracing. From relationships to surgery. Like, that it is okay to just want something. It doesn't have to come from a compulsion. And like, awfully to say it nowadays, if something's coming from a compulsion feeling, generally that's a sign to look at the compulsion feeling, right? And make sure you address that. And if you come out of that still wanting the thing, want the thing, right? Like, that even goes back to relationships. I might get so mad at you, it's like, I want to break up with you. But then you go and you have your cool off period, and maybe you don't want to break up with that person because you've taken that time to unpack, like, well, the why am I mad? Oh, turns out I skipped lunch and I was just hangry. Maybe it's good I didn't break up with them because I left my sandwich at home. Like, I know that's kind of silly, but it's not completely out of the realm of being a decent example of this, of maybe decisions shouldn't be made at the height of our emotions, right? And having that cool down period does matter. And that's for everything, like small scale, big scale. And that's like also part of the investigating part of the conversation of what you throw out, what you investigate, what you look at, what you react to, right? And
Or,
a lot of
yeah.
that got learned when we were kids. And this is like going into yet again that conversation that I know we bring up a lot on Friends Talking Nerdy, is you do have paths to reparent yourself.
Indeed, because, to kind of going a little further here, therapists sometimes use the term reparenting to describe learning how to give yourself emotionally healthy responses that may have been absent growing up. And parenting can accelerate that process because children naturally expose emotional reflexes, especially when you get things thrown at your head. You may suddenly notice your impatience, your fear, your emotional shutdown patterns, your discomfort with crying, your conflict responses, not because you're failing, but because children reveal nervous system patterns incredibly fast. And that self-awareness can either become shame or growth. And it's important to focus on the growth mindset, right? Because it's like if your kid is going at the grocery store and is going to burst out into tears, yeah, you have impatience, you have fear, because if you're in a grocery store, there are a lot of people with opinions about parenthood out there, and they will be there to judge you. and
Opinions are like assholes. Yes, you have one, but you don't need to talk about it. Like,
it probably stinks too. Yeah.
well, I mean, and it might not stink. You might have the cleanest asshole around. And who knows, maybe some people are interested in hearing about your asshole, but just ask first. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's
Maybe they
stuff
want
that,
to hear about the Loom product that you purchased that makes your butthole squeaky clean. They might be interested, but just ask first. Like, you know what I mean? Otherwise, it's just kind of weird to talk about it.
yeah. You have a bidet? Get out of here. No. But you want to be able to use these experiences that you encounter as a father, throughout any era of the kid's life, as a way to kind of challenge yourself to continue to be better. You're always going to make mistakes. You're human. You will always make mistakes. Let's get that out of the way. But we're talking about the emotional well-being of your kids, and if you are identifying that you yourself have had cycles of things that you have done, that your parents have done, that your grandparents have done, and they're unhealthy and you want to break it, you can. But you have to be able to acknowledge that in yourself. You have to be able to deal with it yourself. You have to deal with, the crying kid in the middle of the grocery store,
Yes.
because you can do that in an emotionally positive way, even though on the inside you're like, shut the hell up.
Right. And some of that goes back to reparenting. This is stuff that you were taught, right? And I know, it can be somewhat painful to bring up how we were raised sometimes and bringing back those memories. But there's a reason talk therapy is helpful and that it does work. There's something called memory reconsolidation. And it's really this fascinating neuroscience concept. But basically, when memories are recalled, so when you're doing that talk therapy, they briefly become editable before being stored again. And some therapists believe healing occurs partly because people revisit these old experiences while having new emotional experiences to help give context. This is why I say, if you're reparenting and you're discovering parental wounds, I don't think it hurts to understand where your parent was maybe coming from with stuff, to try to unpack what their intention was, in spite of the impact that you are having to work on now, because there really is healing there, measurable healing. Parenting helps create those moments, though, right? And this is why I will never fully shame the whole well, why didn't you get your shit together before you had a kid? Because sometimes you don't know. You don't know the bone didn't heal right until you move it in just such the right way that it clicks and it hurts again, right?
Oops. Yeah.
Right. Like the analogy there, right? Maybe you just didn't do this one twist to realize, oh man, it wasn't really healed in this section. Shit, that hurts all over again. Right? And but address it. Get off the train. Stop moving the arm, get the medical attention. Right? You can that's the sign. It's not oh man, I should just ignore that because I thought I had my shit together there. No, you should totally address it because your child's gonna notice. We've already gone into that. They're highly perceptive at this age. It's everything that their body is built for because that's what keeps them surviving. That is part of their survival instinct, the packet of skills that kids have. We cannot help it. They're going to read you. If they're having a tantrum, best thing you can do is calm down. If you're in pain and experiencing something, the best thing you can do is identify and regulate your own emotions so that they can feel comfort when you calm down from identifying and regulating your own emotions, right? What's great is you don't even have to work on their stuff anymore. At that point, it is about you and you have more control over that, right? So yeah, memory reconsolidation. It is fascinating. It is super cool. And it is why talk therapy is worth doing it, right? The kind of, especially with dudes well, I don't want to talk about it, right? There's that kind of stigma there with talking about it. But I'm telling you, dudes, put your hand on the stove for this one. I promise it's not actually hot. It's just painted red. But that one is definitely worth it. Talk about those experiences, try to unpack them, and try to give yourself new context as you learn things, especially being a parent and understanding how hard it is to do the right thing all the time. That gives you context to heal some of the stuff from your own parents.
Indeed. Now, sometimes fathers become so afraid of repeating unhealthy parenting that they swing too far in the opposite direction. Speaking of pendulums, I think a lot of dads quietly carry this fear. What if I become my father? And depending on someone's upbringing, that fear can become extremely powerful. So some fathers overcorrect. If they grew up with harsh discipline, they become overly permissive. If they grew up emotionally ignored, they become hyper attentive. If they grew up controlled, they avoid structure completely. And honestly, that makes sense psychologically. People often react against pain by running hard in the other direction. But, we want to be able to have that discussion about overcorrection versus balance. I mean, you've talked about uh, a pendulum swing and all that stuff. And if you go too far to the left, when you've experienced the pendulum being too far to the right, you're creating a whole different set of problems at the end of the day.
Right. And we've talked about that pendulum effect way more culturally. But as we've discussed before, if something can be applied at the macro, it can probably be applied at the micro too. So to the individual, right? And the other way around, micro to macro to micro when it comes to culture. And there is actually a defense mechanism they talk about in psychology that is the pendulum effect effectively. It's called reaction formation. And that is that sometimes people move strongly in the opposite direction of something they fear. And one of the interesting angles to bring up on this is like the example you gave. A father terrified of becoming controlling may accidentally become overly permissive, not because he's weak, but because he's running from something that he factually know didn't work for him. And boy, howdy, is that kind of understandable when you put it that way. Like it is still an overcorrection. It is still a pendulum overswing, but it's an understandable one. And it's funny because this is like the opposite, right? Like of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like where you can be so worried about it that you accidentally become the thing. You can also be so worried about it that you run so far the opposite direction that you become the overcorrect in the other area, which also is not good. Most solutions, the Buddhist in me coming out here, lies in the middle path. It's somewhere in between. So anytime you have that urge for extremes, that can be a trigger in your own mind to question those extremes and figure out, okay, well, then where's the answer in the middle then? Because that's more likely going to be that stable swing then.
Yeah,
Just a little bit
because
of a tilt. Yeah.
Yeah, because a controlling parent, if you think about it, what they're trying to do, and we've talked about it before, is by controlling their kids, they're trying to keep their kids away from what they perceive to be danger and everything. And
Right.
on the surface level of that, there's not anything inherently wrong with that mindset because there is a structure that you have to provide your kids growing up as a parent. But, if you go too far in the other direction of just letting them do whatever, whenever, you don't want to control their lives and let them experience it. You're going to get them into situations that, could be far, far worse and far more damaging for.
Right. Exactly.
Now, one difficult reality is that healing usually isn't linear, and fathers trying to break cycles are often learning through trial and error in real time. That means sometimes they'll overreact, they'll underreact, they'll lose patience, or they will repeat patterns that they hate. But breaking cycles isn't perfection, it's awareness, it's repair, adjustment, trying again differently the next time, which again, I can't stress this enough, is something that anybody listening to this should keep in mind. You're an imperfect person, you're going to mess up. That's fine. The important thing is that you acknowledge that and move on to try to be the best possible you can be, because that is helping your kids out in the long.
Right. And what's great is being willing to repair is more important than the perfection. Right. So one of the strongest findings from attachment research from John Gottman is that good parenting is not about getting everything right. And John Gottman, and to be fair, others, like he's not the only one, because I forget the name of the other gentleman we talked about, talking about attachment therapy with fathers. But this is one of many basically that are starting to take this on. But essentially, parents make mistakes. Healthy relationships repair those mistakes, though. Like children don't need perfect parents nearly as much as they need parents willing to reconnect after mistakes, because it's going to teach them how to do that. And unfortunately, when children aren't grown with these skills, I think that's why we have such a headbutt in the teen years. Because if we're not teaching them that reconnection matters, I think we're accidentally teaching them that constant compliance matters more. And the interesting overcorrect we're in right now, I feel, is that instead of the child being the one that is being controlled by the parent in essence. It's kind of tipped the other way where parents feel like they need to be more of a friend than a parental role. But everything says, developmentally speaking, children actually need the parental role, right? Like we need that. That goes back into, if you go back in the Too Long Didn't Listens, the Gilmore Girls one that I did, where I talk about like kind of some of the damage that that show does with some of the things that it seems to normalize and doesn't correct as being like not necessarily good, right? Like you need boundaries. This is a developmental need in those ages, and it's like we're dropping it at that point, but trying to be strict disciplinarians when they're really young and it's not appropriate yet. But then by the time they're like middle school, high school, we're trying to be their friend instead of giving them that discipline which they need, because developmentally that's where they're testing more stuff. They test ideas like sneaking out after curfew. They mess with like how they dress and how they present. And it is good to kind of temper some of that. Right? For example, your kid can want to wear whatever they want. And this is a good example of an overcorrection right now, because this is going to make some parents' buttholes get really, really tiny. But because right now the message is you should tell your kid how to dress. You're body shaming them. And my whole thing was like, no, actually, it's kind of natural to not want your kid to accidentally put out there a sexualized message. That does not mean you're saying that anybody dressed the way they dress deserves what happens to them. That is an entirely different message. You can have awareness, though, that certain things are sexualized, and certain things and dressing does kind of give a message of being of a certain age and being open to being approached. And you can try to teach that to your kid in a responsible way. Right? Like that's kind of my sorry, not sorry on that. I don't necessarily agree right now with letting kids dress quote unquote however they want with no boundaries. I think there's actually some psychology and neurology behind this little support that actually like kids do need some guidance during those ages. They do need somebody telling them that sometimes a dress code is a dress code. They do need somebody sometimes saying like tempering some of those things they want to test as important, I guess is the long and short of it. Right. So yeah, like we're not building that early enough is some of the problem though. And so by the time kids are at this age where that's more important, they're kind of almost programmed to not want to listen to us anymore or not want to talk about it, because they're
Yeah.
kind of being taught like, well, then you just shouldn't be having fights then, right? You have a really toxic family, right? If you argue all the time, when meanwhile, all of the psychology points to it's just as damaging to never have conflict and disagreements with your kids as if you never have it with your partner. We're learning that's not good. Somebody is not expressing something they want or need. And the overcorrection we're having right now is children's emotions and needs for a long time got shut out. And right now, our overcorrect pendulum as parents is we're prioritizing, we're having more of a kid-centered world. But it's kind of showing that that's not necessarily the right answer either. Right? And it's kind of giving like a disregard for parent mental health, but that's not fair either. Like,
Yeah, because like with the example you just gave with kids dressing in particular ways, it's not about necessarily stating dressing like that is wrong, but it's stating that you at 13 years old don't want to bring about the type of reactions that will come this way. It's almost like teaching them a proper mindset of like alcohol, for instance. You can tell a kid that when you're of a certain age, in a certain situation, in a safe setting, to where you're not driving or anything like that, you can
right,
have this thing called an adult beverage. Just like at when you are in your 20s, you can dress like you're in an Aerosmith music video from the 80s if you
right.
want. But doing that at a much younger age is not necessarily the best thing, just because of the unneeded attention that could potentially come your way.
Right. And it goes back to I do feel that we're in an overcorrection. I don't think it comes from nowhere. But when you pull it back, all you're doing is trying to teach safety. And that is no different than your child thinking they're really, really ready to go on a bike ride by themselves, but very factually they are only 4. It is not unlike your 11-year-old saying that they really, really, really believe they're really to drive the car. But factually, they are not 16 with a permit. You know what I mean? Like it's those things, but for some reason, because dressing has become such a part of self-expression, it has become that thing that parents feel like they can no longer interject on, even though it still is kind of a safety discussion right now. Sorry, not sorry. I think the Epstein files stuff has more or less told us that we have not knocked out this pedophilia shit. And that I just don't know if I'm comfortable encouraging our young ladies to dress, quote unquote, how they want in a culture that really seems to not have our shit together with what's appropriate to do with children. Or like
Yeah,
how to read between the lines to tell, is this a child or is this actually like an adult that is okay for me to hit on, right? Like,
because
how do you teach that? Like,
yeah, I mean, we are a society that has had numerous people create websites for female celebrities with a countdown clock to when they turn 18 years of age.
it is so creepy. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
because
That's one thing that just I am not in full alignment with our culture right now is some of the age difference stuff because I just think it's gross. Like I think it's always gross if it's over a certain number of years. I used to not. It is something that I have developed that I am still like
oh,
working on that feeling, but I don't know. I just have a hard time learning about power imbalance and that it just doesn't really seem to stop at a certain age, right? Like it doesn't seem to matter if one person is 40 and one person is 60. There's still going to be a power imbalance when you have decades of difference in age. It reduces and it gets way more socially acceptable the older the ages are. However, so far everything I'm reading just kind of supports that there's still some power imbalance there that we might be on the wrong side of history for now on this one. It doesn't
yeah,
mean we can't change. We've been on the wrong side of history before. Hello, slavery. We can get on the right side of it, but a lot of times it takes the cultural awareness to move away from stuff like that, right? So, but anywho, that's kind of like getting into another tangent on like age differences and stuff.
yeah, we'll save that for our August theme. No, I'm kidding.
Right? Like, my gosh, maybe we can talk about that, or maybe next year for February we do like some of like the dynamics of love or something. But
Yeah,
golly,
yeah, we won't have an Epstein month, but anyway.
no Epstein month. But yeah, like so basically, it's like we're not perfect. I do think there's like some things that we do need to try to display or teach to our kids that we're not. Like, for example, that parents do have emotions and that we have mental health that matters too, and we have wants and needs that matter. Like, I think one of the interesting things I'm going to be trying is getting the baby Reverend out of what this book has been calling kid world. That kid world maybe is not really a natural place, and that's why kids have such a hard time transitioning to adult world because they get catered to with all this kid world stuff that didn't really exist until recently. And so it can be quite jarring to now be expected to know how to be in adult world when you've had no training in adult world. You've been in kid world. So it's like trying to do better with some of that stuff too, right? And realizing like as well intended some of this was having kid focused play spaces and kid focused times, like, and this is where I say like I'm going to try to maybe do like a shareable or something just as I start getting into more books, since I realized I have access to more books on my Spotify world. Is that sharing some of this stuff that's worth sharing and learning, because like if it all affects the group mental health, it's worth learning how to parent better, right? And some of the stuff that I'm learning is that are overcorrect with not really considering kids at all is that we have so much kid world. We have so many indoor play spaces and parties that you have to go to and toys you supposedly need to buy when play used to be doing the chores along your side with you, right? Like it used to be like a lot more of being by your side. So you saw all of your parents' imperfection. You saw how they corrected social situations when they needed to apologize because you were always with them. You went with them to the grocery store when they ran into somebody and had social interactions. And now we do that less and less. The expectation is somebody is watching them at home. They have been dropped off at this place to play while you do the adult things. So it's like we're not we're accidentally building up for our kids to repeat the cycles again by removing them from seeing us practicing them in real life. And when you compound that with the fact that our social stuff is happening more and more online, right? And even less in the real world. You're not running into people and talking to them when you're grocery shopping. Your head is in your phone list trying to make sure you don't forget something. With a bunch of people that live in the area is you, but you don't know anybody. Let's be real. That dynamic doesn't even exist anymore. So it's like, where are you showing your kids how to be social? And if you need to make that up because of how culture has changed, it's just awfully good to be aware of it. And this is where it's like, yeah, have reasonable discussions in front of your kids so they can see what that looks like. Have reasonable disagreements. Granted, if it is a disagreement where you cannot help but scream and fight, maybe it is the example of, we need to put a pin in this and talk about it later. Because that is still a great example. And it goes back to, boy, does it feel good to know you don't have to be perfect. You just need to work on the skills that might be good for you to work on, whether or not you have kids.
Exactly.
Because how much of this comes up when we talk about relationship speak? He just doesn't tell me how he feels. Like, it's real, and it's more of an impact than on kids, and it's more of an impact on fathers. The ways that we have been raised by our fathers, by our mothers, impacts all of our relationships.
Indeed. And it's a perfect way to kind of start the wrapping up process here, because a lot of fathers may be the first men in their family openly trying to discuss emotional health, attachment, and generational trauma. And honestly, that matters, even imperfectly. A father saying, I love you, I'm sorry, I was wrong, tell me how you feel, and I'm trying, may represent a massive generational shift, not because previous generations never cared, but because emotional openness often wasn't culturally encouraged in men. Breaking cycles doesn't mean becoming a flawless parent. It means becoming a more conscious parent. And children usually don't need perfection nearly as much as they need safety, consistency, emotional repair, connection, and love. The willingness to self-reflect may already separate many modern fathers from the environments they grew up in. Sometimes breaking the cycle doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes you're not going to get a Lifetime movie of the week. Sometimes it's simply a father hugging the child in ways he wishes someone had hugged him. Important words here, because you're going to stumble. You're a human. You're gonna make mistakes, and it's just important to kind of, going back to Mr. Rogers again, put yourself in your kid's shoes and try to remember what it was like for you as a kid. If you did not receive a certain emotional structure growing up, and you remember how that affected you, do what you can to change that for your kids, even if they're adults, even if this is something that you yourself had to learn over time, because life will make it very easy for you to be focused on everything but that, especially if you're on the lower income side of things. You're going to be struggling more often than not to, try to keep a roof over the head, and thinking about emotional well-being and stuff like that is not necessarily going to be top of that list of things to think about, but it should be. It should be. And don't beat yourself up either if you do make mistakes. Just kind of go back and showing your kids that you are able to say, I effed up, my bad, I'm sorry, is going to be healthy for them in the future. It
right.
just is.
Show them how to get off the train, assess the map, and get going in the right direction. You can show them that. Exactly. Like, nothing requires perfection. And boy, like, if you don't want them to feel that same pressure of being perfect, it would be awfully nice if we can just show our kids us not being perfect then. That's where it's like, yeah, I will apologize to the baby Reverend. Like, dude, I lost my cool. I am so sorry. That did not warrant that level of reaction to you. Like, because I can't be perfect. It's not possible. I've got all of the recipe of overwhelm. But it does become that thing of, if you're saying you're too busy to work on something, say it's not a priority, because if that doesn't feel good, figure out what other things like that you can no longer prioritize, right? Like, I know this is a sticky subject, but really, the social media. It really is that distracting. And if you ever want the concrete facts on that, if you ever want to look, you have data in your phone that will say how often you're on certain things on your phone. If you need that concrete to help you realize how much you are prioritizing scrolling, how much you are prioritizing the virtual social media illusion that is replacing your physical social. Like, if you look at that and that number helps you realize, like, oh, well, okay, Facebook is more of a priority than me working on insert blank. And I bet that's not going to feel good 9 times out of 10. I mean, being addicted to Facebook is better than meth. Okay, so that one works. Like, if you'd rather be on Facebook than doing meth, pick Facebook. But I would say prioritizing Facebook over meth is good. Prioritizing Facebook over giving yourself quiet. Like, I was reading an article recently that one of the mistakes we might be making in our mental health culture is constantly filling our ears with something. By all means, listen to our podcast, but don't be afraid of taking a walk with just nothing in your ears. Just nothing. There's studies about green sound, hearing the birds, hearing the wind and the leaves, like physically. Like, those are all good for you. So taking those moments, like learning what you can do for yourself to help is better, especially when we know that the thing that you're probably filling a lot of your time with, and I only say this because they're saying it is most of us, and this is me too. The thing we are as a culture seeming to fill a lot of our time with is Facebook, scrolling Google, etc. So if we can figure out how to curb that addiction that is constantly being updated because they want your attention. Remember, that's the economy. That's the thing. They're not getting your money, they're getting your attention. And so they're constantly fighting you wanting to not do this anymore. It's not your fault. But that is where I think a lot of our energy goes when we feel busy, that we are too busy to work on things for ourselves. That has been my confession of myself. That was why I took Facebook off of my main phone app. Like, it was so funny how I would catch myself just auto clicking to Facebook, like after I removed it from that spot. And it really highlighted, like, wow, yeah, I'm just doing this. I'm just doing this out of habit. Like, I'm not even like actively choosing to catch up on Facebook. I am doing this just out of sheer habit. Now, it's still on there because I need it for Facebook Marketplace. It was very short-lived at being off my phone, but it did help me kind of realize how often I was doing it, and that in and of itself helped break that habit.
Yes, and this is the type of stuff that you can do to just help yourself not only be a better person, but be a better parent to your kids as well, because they, even if they don't want to talk to you, they're still learning from you. And if you can show them through your actions and your words and all that stuff that you care and that you're human and you will acknowledge when you mess up and all that stuff, everybody will win.
Exactly.
All right.
No perfection. We don't need to put that on anybody.
Exactly. Now, do you have any other words for our friends at home before we wrap this up?
No, this is a longer episode, so I'm sorry. We bantered a lot at the beginning. We will try to put a note maybe where this one starts, Tim, because either we got to edit some of our beginning or something. But we'll see how this one holds. You guys seem to really like Father's Day, so maybe we can have your attention for this one for the slightly different angle on a couple of things. But there will be a TLDL. Granted, if you're listening to this part of it, you made it through the episode. Congratulations. See, we can be long-winded about dads, too.
There you go. Yeah. But that's why we love being here each week for you. So thank you all for checking out Friends Talking Nerdy. Each week we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye-bye, friends.